All right, so I want to ask you something really uncomfortable. And if I told you that you had 5 years to get it done, whether to build it, to grow it, to fix it, change it, exit it, would you be moving at the same pace that you are right now? Because most people say they want change, but their timeline says otherwise. 5 years feels far away until it really isn't. And that's actually the problem because 5 years, I think, is the right way to look at almost everything. Not 5 days, not 5 weeks, not where do I want to be by summer, although depending on what month you're watching this and the summer is like far off, I understand that, but 5 years is long enough for real change to happen and short enough for procrastination to actually cost you something and something dearly. Careers don't necessarily change in 90 days unless you're jumping to another career. Bodies don't necessarily transform in 30. And what I mean by that is, like, if you have weight loss or something going on, like, yes, you can make some change in 30 days. What I'm saying is if you never run and you want to run a marathon in 30 days, it's likely that you're going to need a little bit more or to lift a certain weight and you've never been in the gym. And wealth, yes, it does compound in a year, but 5 years, wow, like that trajectory definitely looks a little bit different. 5 years can really be dangerous in the best way. And here is the thing that you've probably heard in that those 5 years, they're going to pass no matter what. So the only real question here is whether they pass intentionally or accidentally. And I will say, like, I want to share this and I don't really share it enough, and for reasons that, like you'll probably understand, because I want to be careful because this part matters, but I also know that it landed terribly for a lot of people. So when 2020 hit, I think it hit a lot of us, and it hit some harder than others. I didn't stop working. I didn't check out. And in a lot of ways, I doubled down. I was running a business at the time and had other business endeavors that were kind of simmering. And I started doing things that on paper, it looked like progress. But the biggest thing that lockdown gave me was something that I hadn't had in a very long time. And that was space. Space to step back, space to breathe, space to actually see my life. And what I realized was that before all of that, I had been running at like Mach 3, like all the time. I was busy. And yes, I was productive, but not necessarily efficient. I was always moving, but yet I think I was really on a hamster wheel. I was doing a lot, but not always doing the right things. Now, I very much believe, and you've probably heard this as well, that it's often in the beginning stages that in business, you're moving fast and you're breaking things that you'll eventually either just fix or figure out later. It's just as you keep going, though, you need to get better so that you're not continuing to break things, but actually improving your process. That's a different kind of trap. Momentum without direction. And you don't notice it when you're in it because motion just feels like progress. You're like, well, I'm moving. I figure I'm moving in the direction that I want to be. But for me, it wasn't until 2021, 2022, some very sobering events that the contrast, like, it really hit me. I eventually realized I had reached a point in one of these endeavors, pretty much the main endeavor, where I needed to exit. I was able to get that business to where it was, but I also realized it was going to take someone else or something else to get it to where it needed to be, and that just wasn't where I wanted to go. And during this time, I could also see who had used that period of time to either reposition, recalibrate, and compound, because I was able to kind of take a step back once I did exit that business. And parts of it were painful. Parts of it were just, a huge weight lifted off of me. And it was a change that I didn't see until, like I said, I had that space. But I had also seen a lot of my colleagues and friends who were basically, they just kept sprinting in place. That's a hard realization. And it's not regret for doing nothing, but you can certainly have frustration for not slowing down sooner. And I really try not to have regret because honestly, I think it is a disease. It is poison. It needs to be cut out. But really what it came down to is I just needed to ask better questions. And that's the part that still sticks with me. That time did allow me to set up the systems that I have now. And the thing about those systems, each of those systems have continued to be tweaked and developed, and they've evolved to what I needed them to be even today. So it doesn't have to be rigid, but it should be a system. Now, I hear quite often, and even like I think coming out of that, people feeling like they were late to the game or they felt behind. And even if you fear that you're falling behind, you don't actually feel like you're falling behind while it's happening. That's not how this actually works. Falling behind is quiet, it's comfortable, and it feels fine, like feels like you're doing okay. You only feel it later when you suddenly realize that that train has already left the station, that opportunity. And the next one, it might not be coming for a long time. And that's why complacency is so, like, again, poison. I mentioned it. You feel okay now, and I get that, but 5 years from now, that is actually when that regret does show up. And I see it everywhere. I have talked to friends, family, people that I truly care about, and I wish I could look them in the eye and say, just like in this video, to say, you don't feel behind yet, but that doesn't mean that you aren't. And let me be clear here. Let me reiterate that this isn't a comparison to where I am or where anyone else is. It is where they actually want to be, where they have communicated or they have desired or talked about where they want to be, and they're stuck. This is not going to be that grinded out message, although there are sprints within the marathon. But speaking of fitness, two people can walk into the same gym. They can follow the same workout and they can get wildly different results. So let's move the genetic components out of this. Like, let's remove that for a second. The difference isn't just what they did, it's the intensity, it is their intention, and it can be the consistency, definitely the consistency, because 5 years of half effort, like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, can feel exactly like you did when you first started. 5 years of focused, intentional effort, well, that is what is going to compound for you quietly and relentlessly. And so really, I think what inspired this video for me, for you to talk to you about this, and again, I'm just some guy on the internet, like, I'm not supposed to motivate you. I'm just sharing my experience and sort of my perspective. But the obsession with the next 5 to 10 days, it's the fast money, the fast results, the fast transformations. And really what people should be asking is, what could I realistically build over the next 5 to 10 years? And that's where the real wealth comes from. And I'm not even just talking about like the money wealth. Like, we could talk about, this is actually where health starts to stick, where it starts to sustain. This is actually where relationships start to deepen. 5 years doesn't necessarily require obsession, but it does require direction. A plan is going to beat a wish every single time. And so I think that this can translate. This applies whether you're 25 or you're 55. If you have got 5 years ahead of you, and I hope all of you have 5 years and more, then you've got leverage. Because another inspiration was that my kids, and this was not that long ago, they all have their own retirement accounts and brokerage accounts. And my kids ask me what stock to buy right now. I tell them, and I don't mean to laugh, but I always say, you're asking the wrong question. Now, of course, yes, I want them to do their due diligence when it comes to stocks. I want them to feel like they've got some skin in the game, like they've got some knowledge about what it is that they're purchasing. But what's most important is time is the asset here. When you're younger, time does the heavy lifting. When you're older, the leverage is behavior change. So really, it's about breaking those patterns that you have repeated for decades, and neither one is easy, but both actually work. So it eventually comes down to where change only happens when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the discomfort of changing. That's it. I am sure you have heard that. People don't fail because they don't know what to do. They fail because staying the same hasn't hurt enough yet. So if you want to really have an impact, really want to make a change, if you want to use the next 5 years well, then I would say figure out a framework, that something I keep coming back to. And really what it took was one thing. And you can pick an arena. So I'll give you like an example, like money, health, career, relationships. It's not everything. It's just one. Yes, those are all important. But when you focus on the one, when you really get good with the one, let's say, let me go ahead and pick career. Maybe I should pick relationships, but let me pick career. So with career, what ends up happening is when you're focusing on that, you're doubling down, you're getting those skills built, and you're figuring out like your growth, then the money can start to enter the room here. The money can start to buy you time, not just things, but time, which then kind of translates to hopefully your health and hopefully your relationships. Same thing like with relationships. We take that example, like really focusing on your relationship. And when that is good, then you can also start to focus, like things are good at home, or if it's a friendship, if it's a partnership, whatever it is, if those things are good for you at that time, all of the other things start to, like, you have energy and time and space to work on those other things. Get what I'm saying? So that's what I would really just focus on is, yes, those are all important, but get really focused on the one. And something else that I would suggest is defining the outcome. It's not just the vibe. It's not save more. It is not get healthier. And what I mean by is, yes, maybe we should all be saving more, but if you don't even have $50 saved, you need something tangible. You need something measurable. That is the key here. So focus on how to save that first $50, something very real. And I would say for all of you out there, and what I needed for me was identifying at least 2 or 3 behaviors that matter most. The 3 things that, if done weekly, daily and weekly, will force the progress. And it's going to be something different, I think, for everyone, but it really kind of just takes a moment to step back, whether you got to write it down, whether you have to talk out loud. I talk to myself all the time. I'm talking to myself right now, or at least a camera. So I have the best conversations with myself. Maybe you can too, to kind of figure out what is going to force the progress. And I would say another step here is design for boredom. That is what happens. This, I see it in my kids, and I see it sometimes among my colleagues. 5-year success is boring. Now, on the other side of that 5 years, looks pretty good, because then you can look back and be like, wow, that's amazing. Like, look where I have like landed based on where I was. But systems beat motivation, and defaults will beat discipline. Now, let me unpack this, like this statement, because I want to make sure that you're picking up what I'm laying down here. So defaults beat discipline most of the time. It wasn't that I lacked discipline. It was that my defaults were working against me. So let me give you an example from my younger self. And for years, I told myself, I'll invest whatever's left at the end of the month, because at the time, I thought that this was the responsible thing to do. But here's actually what happened. The month would end and there would be something left over, but somehow I didn't invest it. Something always came up, some expense, something that seemed like it was unexpected, but not really an emergency. So then I'd say, well, next month, it'll just be better. That wasn't a discipline problem. That was a bad default. For me to understand the issue, I literally had to write this out like on paper, and then I flipped it. So instead of relying on willpower, I changed the order. So it was money comes out first, and that is automatically before I even saw it, before I could negotiate with myself. And suddenly, the investing discipline, that actually showed up. And it showed up without me having to be disciplined or rather feel disciplined at all. It was the same income, it was the same me at the time, and it happened to be a different outcome because the default changed for me. And this is where I often hear, so people say, you've heard it too, I will work out if I feel like it or at some point in the future. But the default becomes the sofa or some other distraction around your home. People will also say, well, listen, I know that I need to learn a skill, but I've got to learn that skill when things slow down for me. But then the default becomes exhaustion and scrolling. And then they, of course, beat themselves up for lacking discipline. But discipline was never the issue. Discipline is what you do when everything is going right. Defaults are what carry you when life doesn't. Now, and again, my default wasn't really carrying me very far. So be careful with the defaults. So if you want the next 5 years to look different, don't ask yourself, I want to be stronger. Change what happens by default to make sure that you are getting stronger. And here, I think, is also one of the most critical things. And as we are immersed in the highlight reels of everyone apparently living a better life than you are, you have to measure infrequently. And I would say not daily, more like annually. Here is a great example, or at least an example that hits close to home for me. Now, my youngest son, he decided that he really wanted to hit the gym, and this was like a couple of years ago. He really wanted to get in there. He was focused on getting bigger, getting stronger, faster, all of the things. And so he did start to go to the gym, but what he did was he did a day one photo of himself, and just to kind of like look at see what he looked like. Now, as he was going to the gym, and he was doing it religiously, he was on a routine, he was eating cleaner, and I noticed the changes. I did, because even though I saw him every day, you look at yourself differently, right? You see yourself differently. And at one point, this was like 6 months in, and he was like, yeah, I don't know how much I'm really changing. And he would go back to that first picture and then go back to like a 6 month later picture. And then as time went on, eventually like he came home and he was like frustrated, and he felt like he had plateaued. And this was like a year afterward. And I remember saying like, okay, let's sit down, let's look at that photo when you started, and like, let's look at the one that you just took tonight, after leaving the gym or before you left the gym. And sure enough, I mean, you want to talk about a huge difference. And size doesn't necessarily equal strength. And I've always told him this, but he wants to get bigger, and I understand that. But I will say he definitely had size. He definitely had strength. We talked about how he had moved up with his weights and his reps, and then going into like much heavier and trying to bring down his reps. Again, I don't want to get into like this whole like gym discussion, but what I will say is when he was able to kind of look a year prior, then he was like, okay, this is definitely measurable. This is definitely different. And so that would be something that I would just tell you, just try not to look at it daily. And if you need to make small tweaks, that's the thing. Make the small tweaks. But sometimes you really need to kind of step back, give it some time to breathe, and see how it's going. But as of this video, the thing is, we've arrived at 2031, the 5 years later. So you've either done it or you didn't. There is no in between. 5 years from now, you'll either thank yourself for starting, or you wish you had started when it just felt boring. So the real question isn't, can you change? It's whether you're willing to treat the next 5 years like they actually matter to you. And like I said, I am just some random guy on the internet. I'm rooting for you, but I can't do it for you. I'm just hoping sharing this experience, maybe having this conversation, hopefully you were able to just kind of, whether you're driving in the car, you sat back and listened, whatever and wherever it is, wherever we find each other, I'm hoping that you've either said, okay, I am ready for the change, and these are the things that I'm going to be doing. Or if you have failed and you have felt the pain, that's the thing. Use that, transfer that energy into something positive for yourself. Anyway, I appreciate your time. I really do. I always appreciate your time here, your attention. And as I make these videos, and when I decide to make another one and upload, I guess we'll see each other then, and we can have a discussion. But hit me up in the comment section below. And I am, like I said, I am rooting for you, and I hope you totally crush it. So go out there and rock those faces and just kill it. Be an awesome human. And I will catch you right back here on your next level up.